What is going on with Indigo Airlines? All over, we have reports from every airport in India of passengers being stranded for several days, flights being cancelled after boarding. Social media has visuals of people shouting at counters, some claiming that fares have gone up to 60,000 rupees a ticket. Remember, Indigo has cancelled more than 1,000 flights in the last 3 days. So what has happened to India's largest airline? What went wrong? How come Indigo collapsed and nobody else did? Did they know this was coming, or is this just a story of a monopoly gone horribly wrong? Let's dive in. So this is what happened Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week. That's where the problem entirely happened. I myself flew between Delhi and Mumbai on Wednesday, and there was chaos in Delhi airport and in Mumbai airport. In the last 3 days, starting on Wednesday, Indigo cancelled 100 flights. On Thursday, they cancelled 300 plus flights. On Friday, they've cancelled, which is today, 400 plus flights. Delhi airport saw all domestic departures cancelled till up to midnight. Same with Chennai up to 6 p.m. Remember, I want you to remember that Indigo flies 2,300 flights every single day. 60 to 65% of India's domestic market it controls. It is the largest player in our market. There are some sectors in which Indigo is the only player that, so if Indigo cancels, there's no other option left for you. If Indigo collapses, then Indian aviation as a system collapses. And Indigo's on-time performance at major airports this week dropped to 8.5%, which means effectively that 9 out of 10 flights were delayed or were cancelled. And we saw people waiting, they saw flights being cancelled, some boarded, then they were deboarded and their flights were cancelled. Several had no water, no food, no clarity, baggage went missing. I've had reports where people have said that they were given a very small window of time to decide if they wanted a refund or they wanted to wait. And if they took that refund, it was a fraction of what the actual flights were if they decided to fly on another airline. Like just today, a flight between Delhi and Mumbai went up to 45,000 rupees each. So what is this chaos and what triggered it? Now, initially, Indigo put out a really vague, wishy-washy sort of response. It said crew shortage, minor technical glitches, schedule changes for the winter season, congestion, bad weather. None of this seemed to add up, because why is this only happening to Indigo and not happening to the other airlines? The big one was the flight duty time limitation rules, the FDTL, and this is the big one to remember. The airline said that the new rules, combined with all of these other reasons, made it not feasible to anticipate the load. So here's the question. Was it really impossible to anticipate? The answer to that is no. It was in fact very easy to anticipate, and it does seem like Indigo dropped the ball. The question to ask right now, which is for the government to ask, is was this dropping of the ball on purpose, or were they simply not able to actually play out? Now this is where the money comes in. In November, Indigo reported a quarterly loss of 2,582 crore rupees. This was a big change from the previous quarter, where they had a quarterly profit of 2,000 crore rupees. So the airline has gone from a profit to a loss massively in one quarter, which means that it's under a lot of pressure. And when businesses are under a lot of pressure, the temptation is to do more with less. And this apparently has happened because of the way their aircraft was ordered. There were a lot of payments that came up. There is an exchange rate also that there is a problem. So there's less staff right now and there's more flying. I want you to hold that thought. So we talked about a monopoly, we talked about new rules, and we talked about the fact that Indigo is trying to squeeze more juice out of its staff that already exists. Now, the monopoly, remember, India, if you're flying domestically right now, you actually have only about 4 choices. There's Air India, which includes Vistara, Air India, Air India Express, that are all now in one. There's Indigo, which is the monopoly. There's SpiceJet, and then there is Akasa Air, which are smaller and they don't fly all of the sectors. So actually only have 2 choices. Now, Indigo operates 541 monopoly routes where they are the only airline that flies. 70% of the routes in India have only one operator. So if Indigo fails, the passengers have no alternatives. They're sort of like the Indian Railways in some of these places. And this is important, not just because passengers suffer, because the airline at this point knows that it is system critical, that if it doesn't fly, nobody flies. The whole thing comes to a grinding crash, actually, not just a halt. And that's the part that really matters. Now let's get to the new rules, right? So the flight duty time limitations are actually like labor laws for airlines. It basically tells airlines how long their pilots are allowed to fly, how many night duties they can do, which are much more strenuous than day duties, and how much rest they must get. And they're told to do this because apparently pilot fatigue is a major safety risk. If pilots are tired, obviously there's a likely chance that they will make a mistake. And remember, in India, we are only just recovering from a horrible plane crash that we had less than 6 months ago. And we want to make sure that safety is our top priority. So India overhauled these sort of labor laws for pilots, which is the flight duty time limitations. Hold your hat on. January 2024, 2 years ago, January 2024, after the government looked at global studies and reports, it showed that fatigue, there was fatigue because night operations and multiple landings, night landings were pushing pilots too hard. The airlines got 2 full years to prepare. And these were the key changes that they were asked. Now again, hold your hat, big one, more rest. Apparently, allowing pilots to rest is a big problem. Earlier, it was 36 hours a week. Now, 48 to 60 hours is what has been mandated. There have been sharp cuts in the night workload. Earlier, pilots were allowed 6 night landings per duty. Now, it's a maximum of 2. Stricter limits on back-to-back night shifts, mandatory fatigue reporting, and risk management. And these changes dramatically, obviously, improve working conditions for pilots, and they improve safety for all of us who fly, because your pilot is not overworked and tired. But what it also does from an airline point of view, it reduces pilot availability, because obviously if you're resting your pilots more, you need more pilots to actually fly the sort of chock-a-block schedule that Indigo likes to fly, especially if you're an airline that likes to fly very heavily at night. Sound familiar? So, seems obvious. Was Indigo prepared? The answer is a big fat no. Pilot unions say that Indigo froze hiring, they froze payments, they signed no poaching agreements, they ran what is being called, and I'm quoting here, an unorthodoxly lean manpower strategy. Even though it knew the new rules were coming, they did nothing to prepare. Industry insiders say that Indigo runs more late night flights than any other airline, that Indigo pilots are used more aggressively, and they have a very high utilization model for their staff. This works beautifully for profits, but it's not great for the staff, it's not great for safety. And when a shock hits, so for example, if there is a flight that has been delayed a little bit, the pilot will then, by waiting for that aircraft to come in, go into his rest period zone, and now suddenly you don't have a pilot available, another pilot has to be called in, and that whole system then collapses. So that's what happened when there is a shock. But were the new rules a shock? No, they were not a shock, because they were notified in 2024. In 2 phases, they were to be implemented in July and November. So this was foreseeable. But Indigo has now cancelled 1,232 flights, and its punctuality has collapsed completely, and pilot unions are saying this is 100% self-inflicted. Because let's ask ourselves, why has this not happened to any other airline? Because they are all being treated equally. No one else has Indigo's scale. No one else runs as many night flights. And the others have a buffer in their staffing, which apparently, according to pilot unions, Indigo does not. Indigo has built itself on a maximum utilization model at the cost of resilience. So I told you, a small delay here for bad weather, suddenly the pilot hits its fatigue limits, the shift rules kick in, and Indigo has no backup crew. This leads to cascading failures, exactly what we're seeing now. What is the airline saying? Apparently, Indigo has told the DGCA, which is the regulator for airlines in India, that there will be cancellations until the 8th of December. Flight schedules will be cut after that, so they will fly fewer aircrafts. Operations will stabilize only after the 10th of February, which is in 2 months' time next year. Crew shortages were greater than anticipated. So here's the thing, your biggest airline, which you are completely dependent on, is telling you, hey, you know what, I'm not going to be ready to do this until February next year, unless you relax the rules for me. What does that sound like? Because apparently they're saying crew shortages were greater than anticipated. How is that possible? You know exactly how many crew members you have. You know exactly how many aircraft you fly. So you know what kind of people you need, and you know what kind of people you would need for 2 years now. How could you not have anticipated it? Effectively, what Indigo did at the end of the day was turn around and tell the government, relax the rules for us, otherwise, we're not going to be able to fly. Now, the DGCA has relaxed the rules. There was a clause in the rules that basically said weekly rest that we talked about cannot be substituted by leave. So effectively, if you're resting your pilot, that cannot be considered leave. So it's not like the pilot, he or she, have exhausted their leave by resting, because that's not fair. This was a fatigue protection rule, and under the pressure right now of the flight cancellations, the DGCA has withdrawn it, giving airlines more flexibility. So yes, the rules that were meant to protect you and protect safety are now being diluted, because effectively, is it possible that the government is being held to ransom by an airline that we are all so dependent on because we have no alternative? Let's take a look at, or you could also say, no, I'm sure like Indigo has lost a lot of money through this and it's not great for them. Let's take a look at how much money they've lost, right? According to their latest filings, remember they've got about a 36 crore rupee revenue hit, and if you adjust it for their savings, it's about 16 crore rupees profit hit. That's 0.7% of their quarterly profit. So did they lose a lot of money financially? Not really. Their survival is not under any sort of threat. Reputationally, yes, they have. But what they've gained in the fact that the government has pulled back that rule is massive. Now, the debate obviously reached Parliament, and Congress MP Pramod Tiwari actually raised it in Rajya Sabha today, saying this is a problem of monopoly. And Parliamentary Affairs Minister Kiran Rijiju responded saying the government is examining it. Now here's the thing, India has something called a competition commission whose job it is to make sure that no one private player creates a monopoly. And in a capitalist economy, which is what we are, you can't have one player dominate the entire sector, because that player will then control the prices, that player will control the quality of the services, that player will then be able to do whatever they want and hold the entire country to ransom. Now, does that sound familiar to you? Now, this is what the government has ordered now. It has ordered that airlines must provide timely, accurate updates to passengers, because one of the biggest problems, and this I don't figure out, right? If Indigo is already cancelling hundreds of flights every day, why don't they tell people before they leave home? So send them a message in the morning saying your flight has been cancelled. Don't come to the airport. Instead, they allow people to come to the airport, go through security, or standing in front of the gate. You've left one poor ground staff there to handle this much stress. That person is obviously not, capable or trained to do so. They crack under the pressure. And it just turns into a nightmare for everyone involved. It's purely a problem also of communication. So the government has mandated that everybody should get timely updates. They have mandated automatic refunds for all cancelled flights, hotel stay and support for stranded passengers, priority help for persons with disabilities and senior citizens. Also, as of today, a high-level inquiry has been ordered into why the large-scale cancellations happened. So on one hand, yes, you suddenly had these rules that came in and you were not prepared because, you didn't read your papers for the last 2 years. But why did you suddenly have to cancel so many flights all at the same time? What happened? The government is apparently looking into that. What led to the mismanagement and where the accountability lies? And really, the question is why the large-scale cancellations happened. Did it happen because Indigo had no choice? Or did it happen because Indigo was trying to send the government a message? Now, multiple associations of pilots, including the Federation of Indian Pilots, FIP, and Airline Pilots Association of India, ALPA, say, and I'm quoting, that the crisis was not caused by the new safety rules, but by airlines failing to plan for them. Besides having 2 years' notice, they're accusing the airline of running very lean staffing methods, freezing and hiring pay, overscheduling, and ignoring fatigue warnings raised since 2019. Now they say the airlines are using this meltdown, and I'm quoting here, to arm twist the regulator and to push for dilution of fatigue norms. Their stance was very blunt. They've said, and I quote, safety rules introduced to prevent pilot exhaustion should not be weakened because of poor airline planning. Pilot unions warn that rolling back the rest requirements under pressure risks to undermine the very safeguards meant to prevent fatigue-linked incidents in the cockpit. End quote. What does this mean for you? If you're flying, expect disruptions till mid-December. So basically, if you're flying Indigo, I mean, think about it. Before you book that ticket, expect some sort of disruptions. Check very carefully before you leave your home or go to the airport whether your flight has been cancelled or it has been moved or delayed. If you're flying other airlines, obviously, it's very likely that tickets are going to become very expensive because the demand for those tickets will shoot up because the biggest player is not flying. Build buffer time into travel plans and track your flights frequently. Beyond that, though, it raises big questions for us as a country. Our country is massive. Remember, the government has spent the last better part of the decade building new airports because of a plan that every Indian should be able to fly. And that's great, but why do we have one private player controlling the entire market? How did we get to this point? Remember, we've had great airlines who've completely vanished for various reasons, and that's a separate video. We had Kingfisher Airlines, we had Jet Airways, we had lots of, budget airlines, and we had full fare airlines, and a lot of them have vanished because of mismanagement, because of corruption, because of various reasons. In fact, it was interesting. One of the news channels asked Praful Patel for his opinion of why this problem has been created. He is a great person to ask about why there are problems in our aviation industry. He knows so much about why things went wrong. And finally, should the system be so dependent on one private airline that private business errors become a national crisis that caused so much pain for so many people across the country? Pilot fatigue isn't a technicality. It's not about resting, and it's not about, we should treat our people well and have work-life balance. It's simply a question of life and death, between the difference between a fully alert crew flying your plane and someone who's tired and flying beyond safe limits. And remember, these are limits that are used across the world, but somehow in India, we have not been able to implement them. And especially, I'm bringing this up, and I'm sorry I'm having to bring it up a second time, especially when we are as a country still recovering from the grief and shock of a bad plane crash that happened less than 6 months ago. The Indigo meltdown is not bad weather, it's bad planning. It's a story of cost cutting, it's a story of monopoly, and it's a story of a fragility of a system that is built around one dominant private sector player. And remember, a lot of times as Indians, we forget the difference between public sector and private sector. We feel that public sector or public service, PSUs, are sloppy and badly managed, and they bleed money, and private sector is great because it's so efficient. But the main reason why you should remember that public sector exists to serve the people of India. Private sector exists only to return value to shareholders. That is the only stated motive for a private sector company. And that's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you give so much power into the hands of one private sector company whose only job and stated motive, as it should be, is to return value to their shareholders, they will be able to hold your entire country and your government to ransom, because they'll say, hey, I cancelled my flight. Sorry, these rules are too hard for me. That is where the Competition Commission comes in. It's a great government agency that's been soundly hibernating now for the last decade or so. It'll be interesting to see if it says anything at all about what's happening in our aviation sector right now. Leave me a comment in the comment section on what you believe is actually happening and who you think is at fault.